We ask a couple of preliminary questions, following which then you will proceed with your testimony.
Okay.
Please restate your name.
My name is Sackor Zahnee.
How you spell that?
Sackor. The crew pronunciation is Sackor. My last name is Zahnee, but when I went to school, they called me Zahnee, so I accepted the school. Sackor Zahnee.
Sackor Zahnee.
Yeah.
You want to spell Zahnee too?
I'm sorry?
Please spell Zahnee.
Zahnee.
Zahnee. Your date of birth or age, please?
April 18, 1982. 26.
Where do you currently reside?
Southwest Philadelphia.
Come again?
Southwest Philadelphia.
Oh, Southwest.
It's called Little Monrovia.
New Monrovia.
Little Monrovia.
Oh, Little Monrovia. Your vocation or occupation, what do you do? What takes up your time?
Well, I work as a lab tech at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. But I'm just doing it for the money. That's not my profession or anything.
You work as a lab technician?
Yes, at a drug manufacturer, GlaxoSmithKline.
Okay. When did you leave Liberia for the U.S.?
October 1996.
Is that when you arrived in the U.S. or you left Liberia?
Yeah, that's when I came and when I left. I came in
October 96.
Yeah.
Okay, Sackor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
You may proceed now with your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to start off by I'd like to thank God for giving me the opportunity to be here today, to be a part of this public dialogue, which I hope would seek to find out the truth about the very experiences that we all experienced during our civil war in Liberia. And secondly, I would like to thank my parents, who was there for me throughout the turbulence time of the Civil War, making sure that we was alive and protected. And the fact that they gave me permission today to come out here to, for the first time, put on the public record just a tiny bit of our family history. And thirdly, but most importantly, I'd like to thank the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia, you guys, and also the Advocate for Human Rights group. Thank you very much, Laura Young and Sarah Paoletti. But not to finish off, I'd also like to thank Hamlin University for being a part of history with us here today and letting us use this building. I understand I only have about, time is fast spent, I only have about 25 minutes. But because of the TRC and the Human Rights Advocate Group, I'm so glad that ordinary citizen like myself, who's by all means just a nobody, will finally get to the opportunity to at least we understand that though we may not be that important, but our human rights is not going to be taken for granted. And I hope that you guys will, thank you for listening to me for that. Thank you for including me in the process. Where do I begin? The Civil War in Liberia affected me and my family in so many ways that is so profound. From the death of so many family members to the emotional pain and scars that's associated with witnessing and surviving through what I think is quite a prolonged peak campaign of ethnic cleansing. If you remind me, I would just glance on my notes every now and then so I can reconnect to see where I was at in my testimony.
Are those your personal notes?
Yes.
from your own recollections.
Yeah, it's handwritten.
You will share them with us at the end of your testimony?
I have no problem.
Okay.
Sure. Though I was going to say, though my experiences may have some unique aspect to it, by and large, I think for most of the victims of the Civil War in Liberia, we all have common and shared experiences, like dodging stray bullets and rockets, going through diseases, starvation and hunger, and et cetera, fear and intimidation and all that stuff. But the focus of my testimony today that I want you to understand is I want to focus my testimony on the issues that has to do with ethnic identity in pre-Liberia and during the war. And I would like to focus on the negative impact that my ethnicity, my ethnic affiliation was the consequence during the Civil War, what my ethnic affiliation resulted into during the Civil War. So, in order to tell that story, I will have to narrate to you a series of events that would take me from where I started off being a proud member of an ethnic group to a point where me and my family, we had complete loss of confidence in our society and their respect for humanity, so that we was forced, in order to survive, had to deny everything about my true identity for a very long period of time, just in order to survive. For me, this is a story about how political mismanagement of the different social identity in Liberia, and to a larger extent, because they want us to think that, well, certain tribes don't like each other or hate each other. But what I feel was inter-elite rivalry that resulted into what I plainly consider to be a crime against humanity. So, me and my family became victims only because we was us, only because we were who we are, and that is, we was crime. I'm about to get into the story now. I was born in 1982, like I mentioned earlier, in Monrovia. My father, John Zahnee, and my mother, Frances Daughter, she later remarried, and last name was Sua. They both hailed from the southeastern part of the country. My mother was from Sackor, and my father was from Gedeh. So that directly puts me into the heat of the action when the war started. But mind you, I was 7 years old when 1989 was 7 years old, but the war really, I like to think I was 8 because 1990 was the real war. 1989 was just the beginning and the trigger of stuff that happened. When I was born, my father worked for the Liberian Electrical Corporation, and my mother worked as a kindergarten teacher at the SOS kindergarten. That's where I went to school, and me and my brothers went to elementary school. For the most part, during my time in Monrovia, I lived with my two brothers, John Zahnee and Funadi Zahnee, and my mother. But I had two other siblings, my two older sisters, Mercy and Gedeh. Mercy lived in Zahnee, and Gedeh lived in Bombing Hills. So we started off on, but just to make sure, my dad, for the record, my dad worked for LEC way back when he started in 1971 during the Tutman administration, when it used to be called the PUA. I don't know if you remember that. Excuse me. So, my ethnic identity was something that I inherited. My father was crime, So if you know the story of Liberia, you take your tribe is the tribe of your father. That's your tribe. So I didn't speak the language, never been to Grand Gedeh. By and large, my father's tribe was just something I inherited. So in other words, I had no other connection to the Kran ethnic group except that my father was a Kran. I was born in Monrovia in 1982, never went to Grand Gedeh, never spoke their language, and never benefited from anything. Because the picture that I'm trying to draw for you here is, I was born in 1982. That was the beginning of the new era in Liberia, or one that me and my family may not have supported or have any kind of an increment in no way, shape, or form supported their actions that, especially when it comes to the coup of 1980 that took the life of the late President Torbert, for which I sat and listened to his daughter. It was a painful experience, so I just want to apologize to her family and the entire nation for going through such a trauma. But back to my story. When we lived across the bridge, we lived in, I was born in Bormine Bridge. That was on Bushwa Island. Later on in life, we would move over to Logan Town, but then by 1986, after the coup, after the invasion and the elections that Dole won, I have a vivid recollection of the coup, not the coup, I'm sorry, but the invasion, the coup by invasion. I was still a kid who was living in Logan Town, but I remember that because nobody went outside that day. And people were saying all kinds of anti-crime sentiments that I really didn't understand because I was a kid. However, after that, my father was fortunate enough, he was an electrician, he did private contracts, so he used to do this work for this Lebanese guy, John Fast, but it's type of people call him John Blooming. That's the other name, because he used to play the trick, the card games, winners. So when the people knew, he'd be like, Blooming. It's a long story. So they call him John Blooming. That's how we knew him, as John Blooming. He befriended my dad, and because my dad would do work for him on a consistent level. So he said, well, why don't I would like to help you with, this is something my dad told me now, because he knew I was coming here, so he broke the whole story down. So why don't I just help you with your rent every month, so that way you could do my work, and then I help you out with your rent money. But then later on, he decided, well, I have a tiny 2-bedroom house right next to his big house. I'm just trying to get to the point where I end up in we moved on to 9th Street. And if you know Sackor, that's a more affluent part of the city compared to, say, other places that I live, like New Kutan and other stuff like that. The reason why I was saying that was to disconnect, because other people may look at it and see how we started to rise up right after 1980. What I'm trying to say was it had nothing to do with the new ruling class, which were the Crowns. But growing up in my family, in my household, being Crown was something that we was proud of, we was taught to be proud of, more especially the fact that the Crown became the new ruling elites. And they was running everything. And there was actually forming a hegemony, exactly what the military regime accused the previous regime of brown pound corruption and all kinds of stuff. What I'm saying was the new class was doing the same thing. So, but my family did not benefit from anything like that. My dad still worked at LEC as a laborer, and my mom still worked her kindergarten job as a kindergarten teacher. The picture, another picture I want to show that I'm trying to draw your attention to before I get into the war part of my story was when we moved on 9th Street, like I said, the Lebanese guy gave my dad this house that was in his backyard in a much bigger fence. If you know where George, where I stay at on 9th Street, we used to share a common border right there. But if you know there, it's from that fence, there's nothing between the fence and the ocean. So later on, when the war intensified, that became a theater for murder by the AFL soldiers who was engaged in ethnic cleansing against the Manu and the Guillos. So that's what I'm trying to draw your picture. That's why I wasted your time to tell you how I got on 9th Street. Well, we only got 25 minutes. To move things ahead, 1989 came. The start of the Civil War. At the time, I was living with my uncle. I was spending the time with my uncle on the oil road. My uncle name was Bestman Judu. He was second in command at the Liberian Telecommunication. I was living with him on the oil road, and my dad and the rest of my other family stayed on 9th Street. Well, first I started on 9th Street, but based on the stuff that was happening, my mom decided it was not right for us to be seeing stuff like that because we lived right next to the beach, and the soldiers knew my dad was crying, so for some reason they didn't think they felt comfortable, so they would shoot people right in the yard. They would go out all day looking for Guillo and Manu people, and then bring them and shoot them. But a couple people got shot in the yard because they knew they was going to die, so they kept fighting instead of them walking politely to the beach. So they got shot right there, and my father had to, because the soldier wasn't going to remove the body, my father had to drag the body out to the beach, and that was a constant process that was happening. Once the war intensified, and say places like Buchanan was already taken, and it was getting closer to Monrovia, that became a routine event, looking for Manu and Guillo people and bringing them. I want to tell you a story about this one guy who, when we was kids growing up, he used to make the coal pot, the one you put what we call coal pot in Liberia. He used to make that, and we had no idea he was Guillo or anything. As far as we was concerned, we used to call him American Joe. He used to talk with some kind of an American accent, and they had a story that he was deported from America. So we had no idea he was Guillo or anything. So one day, during the war, we saw Alfred run into the house, and he was crying. So my dad was like, what happened? So he said, well, they've been looking for me, and they just missed me. So my dad was like, well, because my dad was quite comfortable with the soldiers. My stepmom used to sell kinjus and other widow market stuff. So the soldiers would always come there, drink kinju and buy a cigarette and stuff like that. So my parents was cool with them. And at this time, most of the soldiers who was still fighting was crying, to be honest with you. Like a huge percentage of them who was still fighting was crying. So Alfred kept crying. He came crying to my dad. So my dad said, well, we're gonna hire you up in the, we're gonna keep you here, because my dad was pretty comfortable. And then it didn't even take too long. Soldiers was coming. So my dad put Alfred up in the ceiling. He was supposed to be there, and they came in and they said, oh, you crying, man, and you here keeping Guillo people, we heard that stuff, and if we find you in here, we're gonna kill you too, because you're keeping Guillo people. But for some reason, they were just dumb enough to not look up in the ceiling. They didn't find Alfred, but he heard what they were saying. So when he got down, the guy we call American Joe, his real name was Alfred. So when the soldiers left, he told my dad he wasn't going to try to, he didn't want to endanger his family. So what he was going to do was try to escape and get over to the rebel side. Maybe he could be safe down there. So my dad said, okay, but when he got out, he didn't even go too far. He didn't even go too far. It wasn't even quite 30 minutes later when the soldiers brought him right back into the yard and shot him. So I saw so many people got killed in my yard before my mom decided that enough is enough. You'll be better off if you go to the oil road and live with your uncle. So we moved to the oil road, but my other brother stayed. My mom was afraid I was too young to be able to handle these kinds of stuff. So one of my other brothers stayed, and my other brother, who moved we moved to the Oro with my uncle. Now, my uncle, he was active in the government because he worked as he was second in command to Oscar Quia at the telecom communication when it was functioning, the one on Lynn Street. But during that time, during the curfew time, the soldiers, the same AFL soldiers, but at the time it was known as Crown soldiers, they would come to my uncle's house. I later found out they were harassing. They would come looking in the house. I found out later that they thought that he was conniving with the rebels. So they always used to come there and harass him. So as the fighting got closer to Oro and the guys that took over the EIW, once they took over EIW, my uncle said it wasn't safe enough. So him and my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, they stayed in the house, and he asked the rest of the family to go down to 12th Street to his son's mother's house, my cousin's mom's house. She lives on the 12th Street. So we left. We wanted to find out, but I didn't find this out until a year later when I got back from the rebel territory, that the day that we left and the rebels took over the Oro, my grandfather and my uncle got executed. They was beheaded, just to be real graphic. And the only reason was because they got beheaded by the NPFL rebels, and it was mostly because they were Sackor. And that draws another dimension to the story, because at that time, the rebels were not distinguishing between Sackor and crime anymore. The fact that those two people belongs to the same language group, and they was perceived to be those and the crimes #1 allies. So it was all linked into the same thing. So my uncle and my grandfather was killed because of that.